I'm here. Hell, what's up, Goth Gamer Nation? It's your boy. We're back. We're live.
Call of Cthulhu, the official video game, is a first-person horror adventure game from French developer Cyanide, and it was published by Focus Home Interactive in 2018 for PC, PS4, Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch a year later. Originally announced in 2014 to be in development by Ukrainian studio Frogwares, who are responsible for a number of relatively successful Sherlock Holmes games. After 2 years with no word on its progress, it was re-announced as a semi-open world RPG investigation being developed by Cyanide, earning its presumptuous subtitle by taking more inspiration from the pen and paper RPG of the same name than the short story of the same name. It was released to generally mixed reviews, with many incensed critics finding it misleading and underdeveloped, and even reviews that are full of praise acknowledge that its successes, while numerous, are strewn across a very bumpy road that only stalwart Lovecraft fans will dare to traverse. Whatever happened in those 2 years apparently didn't have anything to do with Frogwares not wanting to make a Lovecraft game, because they put out The Sinking City a few months after Call of Cthulhu, and that performed about as well as this one did. I have to imagine the proximity to each other didn't help, because halfway through Call of Cthulhu, I realized I wasn't playing the game I thought was The Sinking City, but it was more like the Sinking franchise.
In time you'll find out who's right.
Going into this game, I didn't have particularly high expectations, for several reasons. For one, I don't know of a game with the words video game in the title that I felt had lasting replayability. Secondly, the sales pitch of the game was vague. It didn't seem all that visually consistent, it clearly had trouble getting off the ground, it changed from a developer I was unsure about to one that I had never heard of, and who, up until this game, was primarily known for a series of yearly release bike racing games, and one or two lukewarm fantasy titles like Styx Master of Shadows. The other thing that didn't entirely insist confidence is just, frankly, their publisher. Focus Home Interactive, I'm sure, has put out some great games that people enjoy, but they are very much a AA publisher. Not quite the quality or scale of AAA, and not quite the heart or ambition of indie. It's a really confusing purgatory that consistently leaves me in a state of, okay, alright. The thing is, many games of all kinds and all degrees of quality have incorporated Lovecraftian elements, but there is a particular phenomenon that I've picked up on over the years when a developer dares to outright invoke the established writing of Lovecraft in an ambitious melding of all the familiar Lovecraft tropes. It does not seem to ever go as planned, at least in the last 20 years. Just about any time someone throws a considerable amount of money and effort into a game set in Lovecraft's writing, it culminates into an admirable and frustrating mess. Frustrating because there is seemingly no reason why this shouldn't work. You got a name people recognize, classic source material, an established, expansive lore and rulebook, a team of writers and developers that seem to know what this sort of thing should look and feel like. It's like it's such a slam dunk that they become overly ambitious and they're just kneeling in their underwear about to jump into that frozen pool, and nothing is gonna stop them because they just made a new band, and cause fuck the world. Call of Cthulhu, the official video game, despite being official, is not a direct adaptation of any of Chaosium's Cthulhu-based campaign books, or indeed of Lovecraft's original short story. It is its own original narrative, but clearly inspired by several Lovecraft story beats you'd be likely to find in any of his writings. Why they felt the need to make it official, I couldn't tell you. And this is a pretty rich story that's difficult to summarize quickly because of how many noteworthy set pieces and story beats we get. The quality of how that all comes together, that's up to you to decide, but it opens in Boston, 1924, where war veteran turned alcoholic and sleeping pill addicted private detective Edward Pierce awakes in a damp, decrepit cave filled with corpses of all manner of sea life. There's some sharks in there, we got some orcas.
That's a lot of fish.
Looking for a way out, he happens upon some kind of occult ritual led by a faceless congregation, at the center of which is a hooded man with tentacle appendages. A police police officer attempts to interrupt them but is easily dispatched by the tentacle man, who now makes his way towards Pierce. And when it seems like things are going to get really sexy, he wakes up in his office. Exploring this room reveals a lot about who this guy is. We learn that his time serving in the Great War left him with PTSD, and since then, nightmares like this have been reoccurring and increasing in intensity, which has driven him to drinking and pills, though their effectiveness has been waning. His attitude and his business is suffering. He seems like a cynical shell of a man, taking fewer cases because nothing really seems worth his time. The agency that contracts him lets him know that he needs to get some work done or he'll lose his license. Just then, who's there? It's Stephen Webster, well-known industrialist, and he's come with a cool piece of concept art. Is he trying to sell it? No. Webster is desperate for help investigating a fire that led to the death of his daughter, Sarah Hawkins, her husband, Charles Hawkins, and her son, what's his name? Sarah was a well-known painter and eccentric, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her death and her family's death has led the police to assume she is responsible. Webster wants you to find out what really happened in the hopes of restoring honor to her name. The only clue he has to go off of is one of her paintings, which was delivered to his home well after Sarah's death. The postage links back to a warehouse on a barely populated island called Darkwater, where Sarah and her family lived. Pierce is sufficiently intrigued by this case. It sounds a heck of a lot better than infidelity or whatever else they had to deal with in the 20s. Opium dens, stolen Gatsby hats. As soon as we get to the dock, we get our first indication of the myriad ominous goings-on in Darkwater. Officer Bradley, who we later learn is handling the Hawkins case, is trying to keep a crowd of angry sailors at bay as he and another policeman attempt to push a dead whale back into the water, which the locals see as disrespecting an omen. Also on the island is a functioning bar that, despite prohibition being in effect, is still openly serving alcohol. From talking to the locals and snooping, we learn a bunch more about the culture and figures that led to Darkwater being the dreary, spooky place it is. In the early to mid-1800s, Darkwater had a flourishing whale industry that went dry around 1847, when for the longest time they weren't catching anything. Like Battleborn, with no more whales, the whole operation went to piss. All was lost for Darkwater, it seemed, until, as the legends tell it, there was a miraculous catch. The very ship you ride in on captured a giant sea beast that kept the island fed long enough to survive some amount of time. I don't know what they've done since. I'm assuming they've learned to eat other things besides whales, fish, birds, potatoes, crazy bread. Without their main trade good, the island town kind of fell apart. Being so cut off from the outside world, those who have stayed mostly consist of depressed sailors who drink their misery away. A steady supply of alcohol is smuggled in thanks to a ruthless gang leader and bootlegger named Cat Baker. Breaking into the Hawkins warehouse reveals recent signs of someone taking up residence there, but our investigation is interrupted by Officer Bradley, a relatively simple but well-meaning policeman who we convince to give us a tour of the Hawkins mansion. An exchange between him and Cat shows the impotence of the police on Darkwater, making the idea that they bungled the investigation or swept it under the rug more likely. Despite the fire, the majority of the house is still intact and watched over by a Scooby-Doo villain. Pierce uses his deductive mind powers to piece together the scene of the fire. There was clearly tension and a struggle. The boy's diary seems to confirm that Charles Hawkins was becoming abusive and frightened him. Entering Sarah's art studio, Pierce is confronted by a pretty uncanny painting of himself. He's not given a whole lot of time to ponder how this is possible because he's knocked over by a masked man and the painting is stolen. Pierce and Bradley pursue the masked man through a secret passage in Charles's office, which leads to an elaborate network of tunnels decorated with eerie cave paintings and stone idols. We're given a payoff I knew was coming, but I assumed they'd hold off on, when Pierce is attacked by a cultist and he launches both of them off a ledge into a pit. He wakes up in a horrifying recreation of his nightmare in the game's open, and he's appropriately unsettled by this revelation. I can tell you firsthand, it's not great when your nightmares become reality. Definitely not on my list of favorite things. Which, I appreciate moments like that, but this was one of 5 or so moments in the game where I suddenly became really concerned that the game was about to end abruptly. Like I began to panic at the idea that I had unknowingly entered the third act. Maybe that's just post-Stygian stress. While things play out as expected, the two happen upon an occult ritual. Bradley gives their position away with his folksy conspicuousness. "What are you boys doing down here? Summoning a fish demon? Stick 'em up!" The hooded squid man advances on them, causing Bradley to fire off a few shots that do little to slow him down, but they do reveal the figure to be none other than a deeply fishy Charles Hawkins, who promptly falcon punches Bradley to death. Pierce is able to escape this encounter, but is injured in a cave-in and passes out before he can make it out of the tunnel. At this point, I had no idea where the story was going to go because I assumed it would end at this confrontation. But now the story could go any which way. I don't even have a guess as to, I guess I'm going there. Okay, would have been cool if that just happened organically, and I, would have maybe been pleased that Pierce wakes up sometime later in an asylum, where some grisly work is being done on him. Bradley is revealed to be alive and well, leading Pierce to be unsure of which events were reality. I think this is as good a look into this game's story as you'd need. Like, if you're not intrigued in any way so far, it's gonna be more of the same throughout. You know that so far we've ticked a lot of the necessary boxes for a Lovecraft story. We got a green color palette, a creepy island full of side-eyeing sea dogs, prophetic nightmares about cults, everything is green, fish, a lot of fish, green lamps, fishmen, asylums, green. If you don't want to have the rest of the game's plot described to you, then you can skip on over to this time. But if you've played it, then you can stick around to hear that. Or if you've played it and you don't care to hear that, then skip over to this time. Or if you haven't played it and you'd rather have it inarticulately described to you, then feel free to stick around. Basically, you have free will to do whatever you want in this scenario. So I'll give you a moment or two to decide what you want to do. Meanwhile, we can just hang out here and talk about other stuff. You guys watch those video game awards? Who won? I didn't watch it. I just assumed it was going to be Death Stranding and like an indie game I had never heard of. That's usually what those things wind up being. A huge, big budget AAA game that I haven't played, and a small indie game that I haven't played. That's what I get for living in obscurity. I get to be detached from the excitement of everything else going on in the industry. Anywho, from a padded cell, Pierce watches as a fellow inmate named Francis Sanders is dragged out of his cell. Without any means of escape, Pierce falls asleep and dreams of a disembodied voice called Leviathan, demanding he is set free. A nurse named Marie Colden visits Pierce at Bradley's wishes, as neither of them approve of Dr. Fuller's methods, the man who treated Pierce and runs things down in the basement of this hospital. She helps Pierce escape the asylum basement, but before he leaves, he's stopped by Francis's cell and notices that Sarah Hawkins was a frequent visitor. After creating a distraction, we question Francis, who was an art collector fond of Sarah's work. It seems after witnessing something called the Shambler, he removed his own eyes. He gives an ominous warning about looking at this Shambler before he is murdered by an invisible force. Back at the Hawkins mansion, Pierce, Marie, and a very much confirmed alive Bradley, who has a shaky recollection of the events in the cave beneath the house, combine forces to investigate Sarah Hawkins' death, as her family is linked to Dr. Fuller's, and she has a personal vendetta against his barbaric treatments. Pierce heads to the widow of Francis Sanders. Kat is there as well, looking to profit from the sale of the collection. We learn that Francis spoke often and obsessively about Sarah, and a painting of hers called The Shambler, which is currently sitting in the middle of his art gallery. He begged Sarah to sell her this painting, and for a long time she refused his offers. Eventually she relented, and it didn't take long for him to prefer not having eyes than looking at it anymore, which has to come as a blow to the old ego for Sarah. He could have just faced it a different direction, put it in storage or something, I don't know. Because it's not that bad. It's not that bad a painting. It's just, what can I say other than it's hardly subtle. Now, I guess I see it. I guess I'd tear out my f***ing eyes. Sarah's painting is so bad that the creature depicted in it comes to life, emerging from the canvas like a portal. But Pierce is able to force it back into the painting with an ancient dagger. Maybe they explained this further in quest notes, but that seemed to come out of nowhere. But the Shambler is returned to the painting. This is like the second quality freakout that Pierce has, and I love these moments where we see him just breaking under the weight of the unknown. And for a moment, he's fully ready to just drive this dagger through his hand, if it means his life. Kat snaps him out of his delusion and tells him that an occult expert and friend of Sarah Hawkins, Algernon Drake, may know more about the dagger's properties. Cut to Algernon's bookstore, but he is nowhere to be seen. We do happen upon the Necronomicon though, so while we wait for him to show up, you might as well pop it open, take a little peeksy-weeksy, you know? Reading this propels Pierce's consciousness into the body of Marie Colden, where she notices odd mutations in the patients of Dr. Fuller. Oh my god, this is taking a long time. Snooping around into his basement laboratory leads her to being incapacitated by Fuller. This really bums out Pierce, so he quickly comes down from his out-of-body experience. Algernon shows up, and although he's pissed about the whole Necronomicon thing, he decides to team up with Pierce and hang out later after he goes to save Colden. Pierce shows up at the hospital and is subjected to more hallucinations while being stalked by the Shambler. Eventually, he finds his way to Fuller, who has clearly already murdered Colden in the midst of some wacky science experiment. Pierce beats Fuller and prepares to shoot him, but he's knocked aside by what appears to be Colden, even though she's still dead in a wheelchair. Further into the hospital, Pierce finds something shocking, something he never expected to find in the basement of an insane asylum: his faith. Wrong, oh fuck, that had coffee in it.
I'm fully aware of what I'm doing.
You're a dummy though, you're an idiot for thinking that. He finds Sarah Hawkins alive, and well, anyway, the two of them attempt to escape while setting fire to Fuller's lab, only to be interrupted. Before they make it out though, they are interrupted by an enraged Charles Hawkins. A fight ensues wherein Pierce is defeated and Charles launches into a villain monologue about the futility of escape and of working against the cult, whose influence is greater than they know. This gives Sarah an opportunity to drive a fire poker through his neck. So even though his intentions were to save Sarah from the wheel of destiny, so to speak, his plan to accomplish this involved being an abusive dickhead, so Pierce finishes him off with an axe. And that's the end of him. Fuck him. He's a dingus. Back at the mansion, fuck that dude. Back at the mansion, Sarah gives some insight into the night of the fire and expresses her consuming guilt for her son's death, which she vows to find some means of undoing. She refuses to return to Boston with Pierce until the Shambler is destroyed. While the rest of the crew plan to confront the Shambler and banish it, the police arrest Pierce for the fire at the hospital. He tries to explain the truth about Dr. Fuller to the chief, but predictably they couldn't give a shit about what Fuller is up to and are more concerned with getting Pierce to confess. In his cell, he is once again visited by Leviathan, who offers him a gift of knowledge, throwing him into the body of Sarah as she and Algernon perform a ritual to banish the Shambler, which she does manage to do, and depending on certain decisions you make, Algernon may be banished along with it. The Leviathan then throws us into Kat's body. Her and one of her goons are soon attacked by a gang of fishermen, apparently under the influence of Leviathan. In the chaos of this, Bradley lets Pierce out of his cell and we head to the whaling station, where we learn the truth about Darkwater's miraculous catch. Far from a miracle, it was actually Leviathan honeypotting the starving sailors and tricking them into consuming his flesh, infecting the townsfolk with his growing influence. The crew of the Scylla have gained immortality from this, explaining why Fitzroy, Fuller, and Charles Hawkins all coincidentally had identical relatives aboard that ship. Pierce winds up at the place he was shown by Leviathan earlier. Entering this area triggers an extensive hallucination where we unwittingly kill Fuller and burn down the whaling station. While escaping the fire, we are confronted by Fitzroy and several cult members. He reveals that Pierce plays a role in the cult's goals, as predicted by their oracle. Falling into the water, Leviathan reiterates this to Pierce himself. He is destined to awaken and become the catalyst for some significant mysterious ends that are probably not all that mysterious if you're familiar with Lovecraft or you read the title of the game. We wake up on a cliffside path to the ritual. Along the way, we are greeted by several characters, alive and dead, that repeat how important it is that we fulfill our purpose. At the top, we learn that the cult's oracle has been Sarah Hawkins. She has gone full cultist and wants you to make a blood sacrifice to appease the Great Old One. Depending on your actions throughout the playthrough and your sanity level, there are 4 possible endings. The one I got, which I believe is unlocked by maintaining a high level of sanity, has Pierce refusing to participate in the ritual. A spurned Sarah decides to throw herself from the cliffs, which I'm fine with. Like, what's the end game here? You summon Cthulhu and presume that he'd bring your son back? Nothing so far has suggested that's his MO. It's your fault we're in this mess, so fucking get wrecked.
Farewell, friends.
After the credits, we see a drunken and damaged Pierce with a depressed 1,000-yard stare, forever changed by what he's witnessed. Choosing to take part in the ritual results in the more Lovecraftian ending, as Sarah, Pierce, and the cultists marvel in horror at the fruits of their labor, a now awakened old one. Oh! Okay, come back. Look, If I sound exhausted from recounting that, it's not because I found it to be a bad story. On the contrary, as by the numbers as it can be, it might also be one of the most competently constructed Lovecraft adaptations. Doesn't sound like the right word, more like a shuffling of the Lovecraft trope deck. It hits a lot of the notes you'd want it to, and genuinely, the writers of this game have clear reverence for not only the iconography, but the structure of a Lovecraft story. I enjoy these things, so I enjoyed the story, which I mean to be complimentary and also as a criticism. Pierce isn't the most memorable of protagonists. Like the others, he's there to round out a familiar cast of characters: drunken private eye, mysterious ship captain, mad scientist, the occult scholar who knows too much, an artist sensitive to things beyond this world. They are good for what they are, but that is admittedly not very engaging. If you're enough of a Lovecraft fan, you probably know what to expect at this point. A valiant and deeply flawed effort. But it's all we're probably gonna get, you know? Like I knew what I was going to get when I started this game, and was exposed to next to nothing about it. I expected to play it, all the while stuck somewhere between a smile and a grimace. Like when a friend tells you about a dream they think is really interesting, but it's actually full of, okay, I was talking to you at Denny's, only it wasn't Denny's, it was a rival franchise that I think I made up called Winkies. But you weren't really you, it was like you with a pirate hat and an eye patch, and your name was Captain Parrot Dick. I think ultimately, Call of Cthulhu, the official video game, falls into the same trap that most Lovecraft games fall in. Instead of trying to tell one careful, thoughtful Lovecraft story, it tries to tell all of them. It tries to Forrest Gump you through a number of mostly disconnected ideas, which is a colossal task that I'm doubtful even a AAA studio could pull off, let alone a AA. For a Lovecraft fan, what is here is enjoyable, and the plot has a lot of fun playing with reality and unreliable narrators and hallucinations, and though I still feel like Pierce could be fleshed out more, I appreciate how evident it is that he is breaking as the game progresses. Cat plays a good anti-hero of sorts, trading some amusing threats with other leads and being generally intimidating. The mini story arc given to Bradley got to me more than any other characters, I think, as he's the most innocent and well-meaning of the group and gets dealt a pretty bleak hand. Well, I guess one of them does die, and that's pretty bleak, but, you know. Whatever! Beyond that, the world and atmosphere, especially early on, feels dense. Unsurprisingly, that doesn't remain consistent, but I like the attention to little details, like everyone on Darkwater having trouble sleeping and looking tired and disheveled, the reverence everyone holds for the miraculous catch and the crew of the Scylla. There's a lot of good stuff here. It just deals with a lot of the same pacing issues and bloat. It's so linear, yet tries to stuff the amount of plot you'd more likely find in an RPG like Deus Ex or Bloodlines. With those, you could relegate some bits to side quests or pad it with traveling or combat, but this is just stuffed to the gills because of fish.
A lot of fish.
With Lovecraft shit. Look, I'm trying to wrap this up properly, but I've been in this story section for a long time, and it's starting to make me real anxious, and I just found out that Amazon Prime no longer carries 12 packs of Mountain Dew Kickstart, so I got a lot on my plate right now, and I gotta figure some shit out. Shockingly, Call of Cthulhu, the official video game's gameplay, is a little uneven, a little undercooked. Terms like RPG and adventure game aren't an accurate description of this game, but I can see why you'd apply them to it. Since it offers the facsimile of a skill tree and dialogue options, we can say it's an RPG. In the opening sequence, we are able to distribute points to seven different... In the opening sequence, we are able to distribute points to seven different skills. I'm going insane. And there are invisible skill checks that determine if you can, say, pick a lock or persuade someone to do something. But the game is constructed in such a way that if one of these doesn't get you where you need to go, then another one will. You'll always have a number of options to accomplish just about anything, which in its own way is pretty well thought out. It's a simple and safe choice, but it does help keep you engaged with the investigation. Feels like you're doing something. Feels like you have some sway in how this is going to play out. Even though you don't, but it feels like it. And that's the important part. The illusion. I don't know what that meant. There's the downside that I get get the impression that the skills were meant to be balanced with a more lengthy game. Call of Cthulhu turned out to be longer than I assumed it would be, but I was being very cynical, so you shouldn't take that to mean that this game is as long as it should be. It isn't. In later portions of the game, you'll be swapping characters regularly, and each character has their own proficiency that is completely independent from the points you pour into Pierce's skill tree. I threw myself a little alliteration there that I didn't expect, but okay. When we play as other characters, they all seem to have the same investigative abilities as Pierce, with a slant towards whatever their strong suit is, which just seems odd given he's the only detective. What, everyone can just genius level recreate moments from the past in their loaf of bread? It's weird. It's all weird. It's all a little odd. It's just odd that it's a thing I keep seeing in Lovecraft games where it has all these elements and there's no cohesion. It wants this linear story with a certain pacing, but it also wants to incorporate gameplay to match set pieces, if that makes any sense. So when it deems it necessary, you partake in some activity for that moment. But it might be a while before you have to do anything like that again, or in some cases, the mechanic might not even show up ever again in any substantial capacity. In the first act, when Pierce falls into all that fish, there is a prompt telling you that you're having a panic attack, and you need to run away from the horror in order for him to calm down. Unless I'm a huge dummy, I'm almost positive the idea of running away from a horrendous sight does not occur outside this moment. I think that's sort of what is happening when you enter confined spaces, but there isn't really an explanation as to how that functions or what that means. What does it mean that my vision is getting blurry? From what I understand, there is some manner of sanity meter, but I couldn't tell you how this was being affected. It's always Lovecraft games that I see this in. I feel like what I'm driving at here is that there is no definable loop. There's no core activity that I can point to and say, yeah, this is what you're going to be doing most of the time. There is gameplay you'd find in a walking simulator, an RPG, a stealth game, a horror game, a puzzle-based adventure game, and a shooter. With something like Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth, another deeply uneven game, I can at least say it was mostly a shooter. It makes several of the same missteps that this one makes, but the main thing you're going to be doing is shooting at things. Here, we have the opposite of a loop. It's a knot. I don't know what it is. I don't know what that means, but it feels chaotic. In this game, I guess what you do the most is investigate things. Pierce can piece together crime scenes to learn more about the plot. During these segments, you enter a sort of mind fog and activate hotspots that reveal clues to you, until you've found all of them and you learn some tidbit about what occurred there. So I suppose you do enough of that for it to be the main attraction. And that feels okay. It's simple and easy enough for any kind of freak to understand. I'm not a big fan of this fuzzy computer simulation vision he goes into where you see the phantom memories playing out exactly what happened. I think I would have liked the investigative elements to be more grounded. Something tells me this visual element is a holdover from Frogware's time working on it. Aside from the exploration elements, there are a handful of stealth sequences that, even if done well, probably wouldn't have been my thing, so it's quite lamentable that I don't think they are done particularly well. The first one appears while you're escaping from the asylum, and there is something obligatory and inert about it. Like, for starters, an average build orderly isn't the most intimidating of enemies, and given that we seem to be a pretty tough, hard-boiled kind of guy, I'd figure Pierce wouldn't mind getting his hands dirty, knocking him out, or resisting in any form. What's up? Okay, I guess you got me. The second stealth sequence involves evading a monster, long enough to find a particular dagger and use that on a painting. It took me a while to piece that together though, because what was actually happening was I would move in any direction, at any speed, and die. I look at the door, I die. I try to hide in the closet, I die. I stab the painting, I die. I hide in the corner, I die. I try to die, I die. I die? It's not ideal. It's one of a few times that the game uses what should be an important story set piece as an opportunity to throw a different type of genre gameplay at you. The best example being the moment when, after 2/3 of this game with no form of combat, there suddenly is combat. It is a singular action sequence where you are given a gun that you can't aim, reload, or pick up ammo for, and you approach enemies and fire when a hotspot appears on them. And they will die, and you don't even have time to really even think about the emptiness of this moment, because before you know it, the sequence is over, and you never have to think about shooting things ever again. Unless you're me, and the thought does creep up every now and then, and I want to point to one of these out-of-place genre splices as the culprit of Call of Cthulhu feeling so erratic, but there is something unstable at its foundations. Like some core piece of it was left out for budgetary reasons. Maybe because the game is so short and inconsistent, aside from investigating, none of the gameplay gameplay elements have time to develop and feel intuitive. It's disheartening to see so many of these games come out as a mess, because in my head, seems like it would be pretty easy to make a cohesive adventure game in the Lovecraft universe. But my head often tells me things that are probably unrealistic, like, you can do it, you should keep doing what you're doing, you're gonna make it to you're gonna be alive in a couple months. Most reviews, critical or positive, are going to express disappointment in the game's visuals, which to some degree I do sympathize with. For one, the promotional material for it made it look substantially better than it does, and for a game that came out in 2018, it's far from cutting edge. Though, like everything else, it's inconsistent, I think there are a number of environments to explore that absolutely nail their atmosphere. And there are a few surreal, hallucination, or nightmare scenes that offer some creative imagery and puzzles, and I feel like they should have leaned into that a little harder. Have you doubting reality constantly after a certain point, like in Observer? After Blade Runner wakes up plugged into a dead guy and you're like, well, fuck, anything could be happening at this point. This could be a dream right now. I'm probably inside someone's head, inside the memories of a carp. It's by no means a bad game to look at. I found myself impressed by some of the lighting and texture effects, especially in the first few areas, but keep in mind that I still get impressed by shit like
Eckstein, finally, where's Commando?
So, fight me. Please don't. I'm small and I'm more of a film you while you're asleep and then leave tapes of it at your doorstep kind of guy. That's like my move. So it's not hard to impress me with fancy lighting and attention to detail. I like how much every place is covered in dust and clutter. I will give it to critics that character models and their animations are kinda rough. Everyone has a bit of that dead-eyed marionette feel. This is most apparent during cutscenes, where a character could be giving an intense emotional monologue, but all I'm thinking is blah blah blah.
Or if, on the contrary, you manage to detect some logic, a rationality to follow so that I may understand it.
Is that all you want from me?
I'm sure it's probably the case that they left these close enough so the game could be easily translated to other languages, but it's sure noticeable. Everyone just looks odd as fuck, don't they? Is it just me? It's like not only do they look rough, but they're just oddly designed. And I'm actively trying to figure out what I mean by that. There is something not right. I think it's the dead eyes and the big open mouth. Just chomping away. It's very unbecoming. The soundtrack has a lot going on, and some of it really works for me. It's a varied and interesting mix of ambience and tracks led by a choir of eerie occult chants and tribal percussion. Some of it sort of slips by without drawing focus, but there are a couple standout moments that play well with the Lovecraftian visuals. Algernon's bookshop has this wonderful, lush ambience with lightly plucked strings that sound like they're being distorted and playing in reverse. It feels unnerving and mystical, taking a familiar sound and warping it to imply the unnatural is taking place here. There's a track that plays in Pierce's office that reminds me of The Caretaker, like a nostalgic, half-remembered dream of some big band number from the 1920s. Most of the voice acting is pretty strong. Pierce has a very good, gruff detective voice.
Darkwater is off the coast of Boston, but I've never heard of it. According to this book, it was often mentioned during whale hunting times at the end of the 19th century, but it seems to have been shunned since then.
And every now and then they give him some real acting to do, and he does a good job with those moments.
Shut up! Silence! Stop! Go away! Stop!
Because of the location and era the game is set in, several characters make an attempt at what they assumed someone from the East Coast in the 1920s sounded like. And it's a mixed bag. You've got some different interpretations you'll come across. Some of them...
What's with you wandering around here like a hungry dog?
It tells the story of the miraculous catch.
They tried something. I don't know what it is, but it's a voice.
The name, it reminds us of the golden age of Darkwater.
Oh! He knew that word was coming up, and he was like, I'm gonna fucking nail that Darkwater. I like Bradley's voice too. It borders on caricature, but he puts a lot of emotion into his performance.
That slug, Fuller. I swear I'll shoot him. What do you say, Pierce? Are you with me?
and I felt a lot for this character in general, and empathized with him for some reason. He sounds tired and annoyed and sad, and, well, I guess I just answered my own question. Here's a new game to sate the fans of Cthulhu dice. All the references and allusions that the past decade of horror media has grave robbed from Lovecraft and his mythos, with some semblance of subtlety, only because you weren't familiar enough yet with the source material to notice a composite body when you saw one, at last reclaimed under the proper branding trademark, and collapsed into a grotesque and choppy pastiche, apropos something you always heard was supposed to be scary, incomprehensible, utterly abhorrent. Call of Cthulhu, the video game, aids in the stagnating and genretizing of this strain of horror, animating the cosmic indifferent to serve a fandom its favorite comfort dish with all the tasty ingredients included. It's a shit game. Move on. Whoa! Did Howard write this? It's gonna be okay, dude. This is far from the worst thing someone has done to your writing. It's okay. It's gonna be fine. Look, people like your stuff. They appreciate what you've contributed to the arts. Enough so to look past some things you said and some names you've given cats, because it's that important. I think you should celebrate this. I hope you're, keeping well. What is the point of this so-called game? There's no game here, no challenge. You just walk and click on things when prompted. You don't make any decisions. Just walk and click. Save yourself some money. Just watch a YouTube walkthrough. I don't know. I came across some challenges, like intentional and unintentional ones. I did a thing where I had to light up these signs and run away from a monster. I did a thing where I had to navigate a maze in the dark while a monster hunted me. I had to sneak into a building. I had to navigate a dreamlike puzzlescape thing. Some of these things were not as easy as walking and clicking on things. I think that must be my failing though. Like I'm not good at it. I'm not good at games. You figured out how to do all this unassisted. It was too easy for you, too intuitive. You completely breezed right through it. That's what happened? Is that what you're saying? Call of Cthulhu is a great game for lovers of the Lovecraft universe. This game is faithful to the masterpiece Call of Cthulhu story. Yes, it's a detective game because that's how the story plays. It's not faithful though. Like, I don't think it ever claimed to be either. What are you talking about? The game is boring. Graphic is not bad or not good. Atmosphere is good. Gameplay is a 0. No, I'm with you there. That's solid. Call of Cthulhu, the official video game, unfortunately continues the pattern of Lovecraft games with big ideas, tons of heart and creativity, stumbling out of the lab with limbs missing, extra fingers, and bizarrely the ability to levitate small objects. A complete mixed bag of good ideas, some exceptionally well executed, however most of them are unrealized and unfinished, feeling like the result of a series of setbacks and reined-in ambition. It's frustrating. I don't like this feeling. I continuously find myself trying to concentrate on the game's successes. Like, I already know this is going to be a mess, but what did they do right? What element, damp with Lovecraft energy, am I going to be feverishly sucking on in hopes of satiating my thirst? Thankfully, there usually is something that works. In the case of this game, I'd say it's the storytelling. The storytelling through investigation. It's not amazing, and it tries to hit as many notes of cosmic horror as it can without leaning heavily on established creatures and characters. It imitates the flavor pretty accurately, and it tells a mostly competent supernatural mystery. There are pieces that feel rushed or underdeveloped, like Pierce's military history, which could have been more significant or developed Pierce further. It seems like there was a lot going on there, but yeah, oh well. There are enough spelling mistakes to become distracting. It feels like Lovecraft, which at this point is the most important thing. That cancels out a lot of the game's failures. I found a lot to enjoy in the creepy seaside ambiance. It's kind of hard to frighten me these days, so I didn't find myself getting spooked all that much, despite their efforts. Its gameplay is very scattershot. Exploration and investigations are enjoyable, even though the presentation of them disagrees with me. There are a number of unintuitive elements and jarring genre changes, but about 80% of this game is fine, and frustrations that came up were mild. If you're not interested in exploration-centric games, or things that border on being walking simulators, I'm gonna guess you wouldn't like this, because the things like that are what this game does best. Any other genre it dabbles in isn't a great example of that genre. It's a AA game, and it shows. I can recognize that, but it's far from the horrific, muddy PS2 era indie game that some critics seem to think it resembles. There's a lot of great imagery and atmosphere, and several moments kind of gave me pause. I wanted to stop and absorb the details of them. Characters are not pretty, but you can't always look at pretty things. Life ain't always pretty. Sometimes it stares at you like a vacant ventriloquist dummy. Don't have anything bad to say really about the music and sound design. Both deserve some credit, I feel, because they're the only aspect that is AAA quality. You can probably find it for a price that reflects its worth. I absolutely recommend it if you're open to exploration, being a game's focus, if you're just interested in Lovecraft's work, and if your hopes aren't through the roof, and if you haven't played a game in a long time and you started to forget what they look like. At this point, it would be wise to approach Lovecraft media with trepidation. I've yet to play one that didn't confuse or disappoint me in some regard. Some have managed to at least be memorable and charming in their mess, but others stay with me as just being a mess. No matter how many people you involve who comprehend and admire the source material, something nullifies all of it. If you look at that first trailer they put out, it's a perfect distillation of everything a Lovecraft game should be. The imagery is on point.
The bodies, they don't match.
Turn back while you still can. There's nothing to find here.
I have seen things. Dreams of the deep, of a lightless city. Have you had those dreams as well?
He's dreaming. He will awake.
And sprinkled on top is a pitch-perfect series of quotes that you need in a Lovecraft game, none of which were actually in the game and probably just made for the trailer. So it's not always a case of misunderstanding. It can't be. I feel like I've laboriously focused on the blunders of Call of Cthulhu, the official video game, including its long-winded subtitle, and I fear that in doing so I've overshadowed that underneath there is a very adequate AA adventure game. It's just that the portions that don't agree with me are not only bad, but they stand out from the rest of the game. So it's bad and incorrect. It should not be there. A combat sequence where you shoot zombies in a Lovecraft game, much like many people who find me in their closet would tell me, should not be here, you sad, sad man. And then they call me a dickhead. Ha! Take that, Amazon. You didn't know about my ace in the hole. Walmart. Purveyors of fine taste. They still sell Mountain Dew Kickstart. Special thanks to Ailing Uncle. Resurrection. This deal is getting worse all the time. Dark Raptor 86. Nazim Kamal Uray. News Time. Charles Marr. Karen Mayville. Game Master. Motherfucker. Nylanthrope, Oisto, Dylan Sorum, Mr. Benjamin, Mr. Roboto, Bayard Brown, Alexander Smith, Alexander Sundin, Joseph Zanoni, and Octo for donating at the highest tier on my Patreon. Look, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how that turned out. It took me a really long time to make it. I was sick through most of it. I can tell I was sick in the writing of it because half of it didn't make sense and I had to ad-lib in the middle of things, and it's been a nightmare, but I hope it turned out entertaining enough, and thank you so much for supporting my channel and my dreams. I feel like I'm on a roll here. I feel like I should plug join my disco and read my twats. Here's a song I made.